Welcome, dear friends, to a tale of unexpected twists, second chances, and the remarkable power of a child's intuition that will leave you believing in the magic of new beginnings. Enjoy the story. Jack Foster's phone buzzed insistently, breaking the peaceful silence of his small apartment. He glanced at the caller ID and groaned. It was his boss, Victor Thompson, owner of the upscale catering company where Jack worked as a waiter. "Hello?" Jack answered, trying to keep the annoyance out of his voice. "Jack, thank God you picked up." Victor's voice was frantic. "We've got a crisis on our hands. The wedding reception starts in half an hour. Guests are already arriving, and Tom just got rushed to the hospital. We're short-staffed, and I need you here now." Jack pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache coming on. "But Victor, it's my day off. I've got my daughter with me and—" "No buts, Jack," Victor interrupted. "If you're not here in 20 minutes, you can kiss your job goodbye. Understood?" Before Jack could respond, the line went dead. He stared at his phone in disbelief, a string of colorful curses running through his mind. "Daddy? Is everything okay?" Jack turned to see his 7-year-old daughter, Emily, looking up at him with concern in her big brown eyes. He forced a smile, trying to hide his frustration. "Everything's fine, sweetie. But it looks like Daddy has to go to work for a little bit." Emily's face fell. "But you promised we'd spend the whole day together." Jack knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with his daughter. "I know, Pumpkin, and I'm sorry. But sometimes grown-ups have to do things they don't want to do. It's part of being responsible." "Can't Grandma watch me?" Emily asked hopefully. Jack shook his head. "Grandma's working too, remember? But hey, how would you like to come to work with Daddy? You can see where I work, and maybe even help out a little. What do you say?" Emily's eyes lit up. "Really? I can come with you?" "Sure thing, kiddo," Jack said, ruffling her hair. "But you've got to promise me something, okay? You need to be on your best behavior. No running around, no bothering the guests, and you have to do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" Emily nodded solemnly. "I promise, Daddy. I'll be good." As they rushed to get ready, Jack couldn't help but worry. Taking a 7-year-old to a high-end wedding reception was far from ideal, but he was out of options. He just hoped Emily would keep her promise to behave. The grand ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel was a hive of activity when Jack and Emily arrived. Waiters rushed back and forth, carrying trays laden with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and the excited chatter of guests. Victor spotted them as soon as they entered, his face a mix of relief and annoyance. "Jack, finally! And who's this?" he asked, eyeing Emily suspiciously. "This is my daughter, Emily," Jack explained quickly. "I couldn't find a sitter on such short notice. She'll stay out of the way, I promise." Victor looked like he wanted to argue, but a crash from the kitchen drew his attention. "Fine, whatever. Just get changed and get out there. We're drowning." Jack turned to Emily, kneeling down to her level. "Okay, sweetie, remember what we talked about? You're going to stay in Mr. Thompson's office while I work. There's a TV in there, and I'll bring you some paper and crayons. Can you be a good girl for me?" Emily nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the chaos around her. "I'll be good, Daddy. I promise." Jack quickly got Emily settled in Victor's office, then rushed to change into his uniform. As he emerged into the ballroom, he was momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer opulence of the event. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow over the sea of designer dresses and tailored suits. For a moment, Jack felt a pang of envy. This was a world so far removed from his own modest existence. He thought of Emily, sitting alone in that office, and felt a surge of determination. One day, he'd give her the kind of life where she could attend parties like this, not just watch from the sidelines. Pushing aside his thoughts, Jack threw himself into work. He weaved through the crowd with practiced ease, balancing trays and fielding requests from demanding guests. The reception was in full swing, the band playing a lively tune as the newlyweds took to the dance floor. As he passed by the bride's table, Jack couldn't help but steal a glance at the happy couple. His heart nearly stopped when he saw the bride's face. It was Natalie. Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Natalie, his first love, the woman he'd thought he'd spend the rest of his life with, was here, and she was getting married. Memories flooded back, unbidden and unwelcome. Their first date at the local diner, stolen kisses in the park, late-night talks about their dreams for the future. And then, the bitter end. The shocking revelation of her true identity, the anger, the hurt, the hasty words he'd never been able to take back. Jack shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. This wasn't the time or place for a trip down memory lane. He had a job to do. But as he continued to work, he couldn't help but steal glances at Natalie. She was radiant in her white gown, her smile dazzling as she danced with her new husband. Jack felt a familiar ache in his chest, a mix of regret and longing he thought he'd long since buried. Suddenly, a commotion near the bride's table snapped Jack out of his reverie. The groom had collapsed, clutching his chest. Natalie was kneeling beside him, her face a mask of panic. "Someone call an ambulance!" she cried, her voice cutting through the shocked murmurs of the crowd. As chaos erupted around him, Jack caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye. Emily was darting through the crowd, heading back towards Victor's office. What was she doing out here? Before Jack could go after her, the paramedics arrived, pushing through the throng of worried guests. He watched as they loaded the groom onto a stretcher, Natalie holding his hand and looking shell-shocked. As they wheeled the groom out, Jack overheard one of the paramedics mention something about possible poisoning. His blood ran cold. Poisoning? At a wedding? He needed to find Emily and make sure she was okay. But as he turned to go, he found his path blocked by a stern-looking man in a suit. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, flashing a badge. "I'm Detective Roberts. We need to ask you a few questions about what happened here tonight." Jack's mind raced as he followed Detective Roberts to a quieter corner of the ballroom. He needed to find Emily, to make sure she was safe and hadn't seen anything traumatic. But he also knew that refusing to cooperate with the police would only make him look suspicious. "Mr. Foster," Detective Roberts began, "can you tell me where you were when the groom collapsed?" Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. "I was serving drinks on the other side of the room. I didn't see what happened, just heard the commotion." The detective nodded, jotting something down in his notebook. "And did you notice anything unusual leading up to the incident? Any suspicious behavior from any of the guests or staff?" Jack shook his head. "No, sir. Everything seemed normal. Well, as normal as a wedding this fancy can be?" he added with a nervous laugh. Detective Roberts didn't smile. "I see. And you've been working here all evening?" "Yes, sir. Well, except for when I first arrived and got my daughter settled in the manager's office. She's 7, you see, and I couldn't find a sitter on short notice." The detective's eyebrows rose at this. "Your daughter is here? In the building?" Before Jack could respond, a small voice piped up behind him. "Daddy, Daddy, I saw what happened!" Jack turned to see Emily running towards him, her eyes wide with excitement. His heart sank. So much for staying in the office and out of trouble. Detective Roberts knelt down to Emily's level, his stern expression softening slightly. "Hello there, young lady. What's your name?" "Emily," she replied, looking up at the detective with curiosity. "Are you a real police officer like on TV?" The detective chuckled. "I sure am, and I hear you saw something important. Can you tell me about it?" Emily nodded eagerly, launching into her story. "I know I was supposed to stay in the office, Daddy, but I got bored and wanted to see the pretty bride. So I snuck out, but I promise I was being really quiet and not bothering anyone." Jack felt a mixture of pride at his daughter's honesty and dread at what she might have witnessed. "It's okay, sweetie. Just tell the detective what you saw." Emily took a deep breath, her face scrunched up in concentration. "I was standing near the bride's table, looking at her beautiful dress, and then I saw the groom take something out of his pocket. It was a little bottle, and he poured something into the bride's glass when she wasn't looking." Detective Roberts leaned in, his interest piqued. "Are you sure about this, Emily? It's very important that you tell the truth." Emily nodded vigorously. "I'm sure. I've seen it in movies before when bad guys try to poison people, so I waited until everyone was looking away and I switched the glasses. I thought it would be better if the bad guy drank his own poison instead of the pretty bride." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. His 7-year-old daughter had not only witnessed an attempted murder, but had actively intervened. He didn't know whether to be proud of her bravery or terrified of the danger she'd put herself in. Detective Roberts stood up, his expression grave. "Mr. Foster, I'm going to need you and your daughter to come down to the station to make a formal statement. This is now officially an attempted murder investigation." As they followed the detective out of the ballroom, Jack caught a glimpse of Natalie. She was standing with her parents, her face pale and drawn. For a moment, their eyes met across the room. Jack saw a flicker of recognition in her gaze, followed by a look of confusion and something else he couldn't quite identify. Then the moment was gone, and Jack was ushering Emily out the door, his mind reeling from the night's events. He had a feeling this was only the beginning of a very complicated situation. The police station was a flurry of activity, even at this late hour. Jack sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, Emily dozing against his side as they waited to be interviewed. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Concern for Emily, shock at seeing Natalie again, and a growing sense of unease about the whole situation. "Mr. Foster?" A female officer approached them. "We're ready for you now. Your daughter can rest in our break room while we talk. Officer Johnson will keep an eye on her." Jack gently shook Emily awake. "Sweetie, I need to go answer some questions. This nice lady is going to take you somewhere you can rest, okay?" Emily rubbed her eyes sleepily. "Okay, Daddy. Are we in trouble?" Jack forced a smile. "No, Pumpkin, we're helping the police, remember? Like the good guys in your movies." As Emily was led away, Jack followed the officer to an interview room. Detective Roberts was already there, along with another man Jack didn't recognize. "Mr. Foster, this is Mr. Harrison, the father of the bride," Detective Roberts introduced. "He's asked to sit in on this interview, given the circumstances." Jack nodded, trying to hide his surprise. Natalie's father was here? He remembered all too well the last time he'd encountered the man, years ago. It hadn't been pleasant. Mr. Harrison's eyes narrowed as he looked at Jack. "Do I know you, young man? You seem familiar." Jack cleared his throat nervously. "We've met before, sir. I used to date your daughter, Natalie." Recognition dawned on Mr. Harrison's face, followed quickly by a frown. "Ah, yes. Jack, wasn't it? The boy who broke my daughter's heart?" Detective Roberts looked between them, sensing the tension. "I take it there's some history here?" Jack sighed. "It was a long time ago. We were young. There was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Mr. Harrison scoffed. "You accused my daughter of lying to you, of playing some sort of game. You broke things off without even giving her a chance to explain." Jack felt a surge of old anger and hurt. "With all due respect, sir, I found out that everything I thought I knew about Natalie was a lie. Her background, her family. She'd been hiding her true identity from me our entire relationship." "Gentlemen," Detective Roberts interrupted, "while I'm sure this is all very interesting, we have more pressing matters to discuss. Mr. Foster, can you tell us exactly what your daughter witnessed tonight?" Jack took a deep breath, pushing aside his personal feelings. He recounted Emily's story, watching as Detective Roberts and Mr. Harrison exchanged concerned glances. "So, you're saying that Charles, my soon-to-be son-in-law, attempted to poison my daughter?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "That's what it looks like," Detective Roberts confirmed. "We're running tests on the glasses now to confirm the presence of any toxic substances. But if what the little girl says is true, we may have just narrowly avoided a tragedy." Mr. Harrison slumped in his chair, looking suddenly old and tired. "I knew there was something off about that boy. Natalie was so infatuated, she wouldn't listen to reason. And now this." Jack felt a pang of sympathy for the man. Despite their past differences, he could see the genuine concern and love Mr. Harrison had for his daughter. "Sir," Jack said hesitantly, "I know it's not my place, but is Natalie okay? This must be a terrible shock for her." Mr. Harrison looked at Jack, his expression softening slightly. "She's holding up, all things considered. She's always been strong, my Natalie, but this will take time to process." Detective Roberts cleared his throat. "Mr. Foster, we'll need to keep you and your daughter available for further questioning as the investigation progresses, but for now, you're free to go. Thank you for your cooperation." As Jack stood to leave, Mr. Harrison spoke up. Jack, wait, I may have judged you too harshly in the past. What your daughter did tonight, she may have saved Natalie's life. Please tell her thank you from me. Jack nodded, a lump forming in his throat. I will, sir. And I'm glad Natalie's okay. As he left the interview room, Jack's mind was reeling. The night had taken so many unexpected turns, bringing his past crashing into his present in ways he never could have imagined. And at the center of it all was Emily, his brave, impulsive, wonderful little girl. He found her curled up on a couch in the break room, fast asleep. Gently, he scooped her up in his arms, her small body warm and trusting against his chest. Come on, sweetheart, he whispered. Let's go home. The days following the wedding fiasco were a blur of police interviews, media frenzy, and sleepless nights. Jack tried his best to shield Emily from the worst of it, but she seemed to take it all in stride, proud of her role in uncovering the bad guy's plan. A week after the incident, Jack was surprised to receive a call from Victor Thompson. Jack, my boy, Victor boomed over the phone, sounding uncharacteristically cheerful. I've got some good news for you. The father of the bride, Mr. Harrison, he's requested that you be given a substantial bonus for your daughter's actions at the wedding. Said something about saving his little girl's life. Jack was stunned. That's very generous of him, but I can't accept— Nonsense, Victor interrupted. You're taking the money and that's final. Lord knows you could use it, what with Emily starting school soon. Oh, and one more thing. Mr. Harrison asked for your contact information. Said he might be in touch. Just a heads up. After hanging up, Jack sat on his worn couch, head in his hands. The bonus would certainly help with Emily's school expenses, but the idea of hearing from Mr. Harrison, and potentially Natalie, filled him with a mixture of anticipation and dread. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Jack opened it to find Natalie standing there, looking as beautiful and composed as ever, despite the circumstances. Natalie? Jack breathed, hardly believing his eyes. What are you doing here? She gave him a small, sad smile. Hello, Jack. I think it's time we had that talk we should have had years ago. May I come in? Jack stepped aside, allowing Natalie to enter his modest apartment. He suddenly felt self-conscious about the worn furniture and cluttered surfaces, a stark contrast to the luxurious world Natalie came from. Can I get you something to drink? He offered, more out of habit than anything else. Natalie shook her head. No, thank you. I won't stay long. I needed to see you, to explain. They sat down on the couch, an awkward silence settling between them. Jack's mind raced with questions, but he forced himself to wait, to let Natalie speak first. First of all, she began, her voice soft but steady, I want to thank you and your daughter for what you did at the wedding. If Emily hadn't switched those glasses— She trailed off, shuddering slightly. Jack nodded. Emily's a special kid. I'm proud of her, even if she did scare me half to death. Natalie smiled. She sounds wonderful. Jack, I owe you an apology, and an explanation. She took a deep breath, seeming to gather her courage. When we were together all those years ago, I wasn't entirely honest with you about why we had to break up. Jack leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? My father, he found out about us. He was furious that I was dating a poor student, as he called you. He forbade me from seeing you, threatened to cut me off completely if I didn't end things. Jack felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. But you told me you didn't want to see me anymore, that we were too different. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. I know, and I'm so sorry. I thought it would be easier if you hated me, if you thought I was just some rich snob who didn't care about you. I was young and scared, and I didn't know how to stand up to my father. Jack sat back, processing this new information. All these years, he'd believed Natalie had rejected him because of his background, when in reality, she'd been trying to protect him from her father's wrath. I wanted to tell you the truth so many times, Natalie continued. But by the time I found the courage, you had already moved on. You were with Emily's mother, and I didn't want to disrupt your life. At the mention of Emily's mother, Jack felt a familiar pang of guilt and sadness. Natalie must have noticed his expression change because she asked gently, Jack, Where is Emily's mother? I noticed it's just you and Emily. Jack took a deep breath. This was a story he rarely shared, but Natalie deserved the truth. Her name was Lisa. We got married young, probably too young. I think I was trying to prove something to myself, to move on from you. Natalie nodded, understanding in her eyes. Lisa wasn't ready to be a mother, Jack continued. She struggled with postpartum depression after Emily was born. I tried to help, but I didn't know how. One day, when Emily was about 6 months old, I came home from work and found a note. Lisa had left. She said she couldn't handle it anymore, that she needed to find herself. Oh, Jack, Natalie whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. I'm so sorry. Jack shrugged, trying to hide the pain that still lingered. It was hard, but Emily and I managed. My mom helped a lot, and honestly, being a single dad, it's been the most challenging and rewarding thing I've ever done. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts of what might have been. So what happens now? Jack finally asked. With Charles, I mean. The police said it was attempted murder. Natalie's expression hardened. He's going to prison for a very long time. Turns out he was after my family's money. The whole relationship was a setup. Jack shook his head in disbelief. I'm so sorry, Natalie. You didn't deserve any of this. She gave him a wan smile. No one does. But it's opened my eyes to a lot of things, including how much I've missed you, Jack. All these years, I've wondered what might have been if I'd just been brave enough to stand up to my father. Jack felt his heart racing. Natalie, He was interrupted by the sound of a key in the lock. The door swung open, and Emily burst in, followed by Jack's mother. Daddy, you'll never guess what happened at school today. Emily stopped short when she saw Natalie. Oh, hello. Are you the pretty bride from the party? Natalie laughed, kneeling down to Emily's level. I am, and you must be the brave girl who saved me. Thank you, Emily. As Jack watched Natalie interact with his daughter, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Regret for the years they'd lost, hope for what might still be possible, and a deep, abiding love for the little girl who had changed his life in so many ways. Over the next few weeks, Jack's life took on a surreal quality. His relationship with Natalie, dormant for so long, began to cautiously rekindle. They met for coffee, took walks in the park, and slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered years ago. Emily, for her part, was thrilled with the new development. She took to Natalie immediately, fascinated by her stories and charmed by her kindness. Jack watched with a mixture of joy and trepidation as the two most important women in his life grew closer. One sunny afternoon, as they sat on a blanket in the park, Emily playing nearby, Natalie turned to Jack with a serious expression. Jack, there's something I need to tell you, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I've been doing a lot of thinking about my family, about the future I want. Jack felt his heart skip a beat. What are you saying, Natalie? She took a deep breath. I'm saying that I want to make things right. I've been talking to my father, trying to make him understand how wrong he was to interfere in our lives all those years ago. It hasn't been easy, but I think he's starting to come around. Jack was stunned. Natalie, that's incredible. But are you sure about this? I mean, your father's approval was so important to you before. She nodded, her eyes shining with determination. It was, and in some ways, it still is. But I've realized that my happiness is important too. And Jack, you and Emily make me happy. I was hoping that maybe, if you're willing, we could see where this leads. Start fresh, but with all our cards on the table this time. Before Jack could respond, Emily came running up, her hands cupped around something. Daddy, Natalie, look what I found. She opened her hands to reveal a small white flower. It's a daisy, she announced proudly. Miss Johnson at school says that daisies mean new beginnings. Can we plant it at home, Daddy? Jack looked from the delicate flower in his daughter's hands to Natalie's hopeful face and felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was time for all of them to have a new beginning. You know what, sweetheart? I think that's a wonderful idea, he said, pulling both Emily and Natalie into a hug. A perfect idea. 1 year later, the small garden behind Jack and Natalie's new house was in full bloom, a riot of colors and scents. At the center, a patch of daisies swayed gently in the breeze, grown from the single flower Emily had found that day in the park. Jack stood on the back porch, watching as Natalie helped Emily with her homework at the picnic table. The past year had been a whirlwind of change, navigating their rekindled relationship, introducing Natalie to Jack's world, and slowly bridging the gap between their different backgrounds. To Jack's surprise, Natalie's father had made genuine efforts to make amends. While there was still some awkwardness, the older man had come to respect Jack's dedication as a father and his work ethic. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As he looked at his little family, Jack felt a sense of peace he'd never known before. Life had taken them on an unexpected journey, full of twists and turns, heartbreak and joy. But in the end, it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Emily looked up from her homework, catching Jack's eye. "Daddy," she called, waving him over, "come see what I made." As Jack joined them at the table, Natalie slipped her hand into his, giving it a gentle squeeze. He squeezed back, grateful for this second chance at love, for the brave little girl who had brought them back together, and for the promise of many new beginnings to come.